I'm Sam Berkman, J Street's National Director of Communal Relations, and welcome to End the Silence, a community call to action. Thank you for joining us today for this important demonstration of unity as we address what has been and continues to be a moral reckoning. Since October 7th, we have all felt the weight of this war impact our lives. Many of us know people who were murdered that day, who were taken hostage. We have family, friends, and colleagues either on active duty or have been called up from the reserves to serve in Gaza or elsewhere. We know so many who have spent days and nights going back and forth from bomb shelters. We have encountered increased anti-Semitism and violence across the United States. Unfortunately, it is easy to make the case that the lives of all Jews have been impacted by this war. And though each of our personal timelines may have differed for reaching these conclusions, we are all here now, today, 22 months after October 7th, to say it is time for this war to end. It is time to free the hostages, and it is time to surge aid into Gaza. Too much blood has been spilled. Too many days have gone by in captivity. Too many lives are on the brink of starvation and preventable death. And while it is easy to lay the blame with Hamas for all of this, to claim even rightly that none of this would have happened had they not launched their barbaric attack on October 7th, today that is not enough. It is not enough to check the box of assigning all responsibility to a terrorist organization, think that that absolves us, and go about our day. Rabbi Menachem Creditor put it more succinctly when he recently stated, "No, we are not morally responsible for Hamas's crimes, but yes, we are morally responsible for how we wield our power." And I think we are all here today because we know that Israel has immense power. And we also know, sadly, that it has not exercised that power to its full extent to preserve life and bring this war to a close. We've heard from recent Israeli former defense ministers and retired generals and commanders that Israel has achieved all that it can militarily in Gaza. We've heard the call from hostage families for an end to the war that includes the release of all remaining hostages, a position supported by 74% of Israelis and one that the government has not plainly offered in negotiations. And we've disgustingly heard government officials from the prime minister on down explicitly acknowledge their use of humanitarian aid as a weapon of war. It's sad, it's frustrating, it's difficult to know that these are the actions being taken or not taken by Israel, the Jewish state. My relationship with Israel is strong enough to withstand these truths and these faults. In fact, my relationship with Israel requires me to confront and not avoid them, to acknowledge and demand that Israel can do better. I don't recognize this Israel that uses starvation as a weapon of war, this Israel that would not do everything in its power to bring home the hostages. 22 months in captivity. It's too long. It's 664 days too long, and every day that goes by is another day too long. The Israel I know is the massive pro-democracy movement with supporters who were defending Israeli democracy for months when on October 7th, they shifted gears in an instant and transformed into a huge support network, racing to the front lines, gathering supplies and donations, collecting intel on the hostages, providing mental health resources. It was tragic but necessary. It was the brilliant combination of Israeli patriotism, ingenuity, and compassion. The Israel I know is Women Wage Peace, the Parents Circle, Families Forum, and many other organizations that look to bridge divides, see the humanity in the other, and recognize that the fates of Israelis and Palestinians are all bound up in each other. I know that Israel is still there, overshadowed by extremist politicians, horrific headlines, cynical political deliberations, and the ugliness of war. There are still Israelis raising their voices and fighting for the Israel I know, and that you all know too. And so we are gathered here today to support them, to join together and rededicate ourselves to do everything in our power to end this war, free the hostages, and surge aid to Gaza in the name of our Jewish and democratic values. And I thank you all again for joining us at this critical moment. We are grateful to be joined today by a number of respected leaders in the American Jewish community. And to kick us off, I'd like to turn it over to Rabbi Jill Jacobs, the CEO of Truah, the Rabbinic Call for Human Rights. Rabbi Jacobs.
Thank you so much to Sam and to J Street for bringing us together. I wish we didn't have this reason to be together today, but it's really good to be with so many friends and colleagues who all want the same thing, which is for this war to end, for the hostages to come home, for the starvation and the killing in Gaza to stop. In just a couple of days on Saturday night, we're going to be reading the book of Eicha. And honestly, you could open up the book of Eicha and read almost any single line, and it would be so resonant with the moment today. For example, Kol ha'maneh nachim mevakshim lechem. All of her inhabitants sigh. All the inhabitants of the city are sighing as they search for bread. They've bartered their treasures for food to keep themselves alive. We hear reflections of babies who are in their mother's arms dying for lack of milk and other food. Unfortunately, these scenes from the destruction of Jerusalem sound very much like the streets of Gaza today. There's a midrash that I love, a rabbinic teaching that I love about the book of Eicha, in which God is depicted as crying. God is up above looking down at what's happening, and God is crying, and yet God doesn't really know how to mourn because God isn't human. And so God brings in the Malachei Asharet, the angels, and says, well, what does a human being do when they're mourning? And these angels say, basically describe how human beings mourn, the process of Shiva, and God says, okay, that's what I'm going to do. But what's so poignant about this midrash is that God isn't connected to human beings in this moment. God can't ask them. God is up by God's self, crying and relying on these angels for information about the human world. And meanwhile, human beings are down below also crying, but that relationship for the moment is broken. And so I really believe that as we're crying today, that God is up above also crying over the destruction, both and the deaths, both of Israelis and of Palestinians. And I hope that we can reconnect and make that connection again to cry together and to bring a change to the world. Because this is not just a political issue, this is a moral issue, what's happening right now. The good news is that more and more of us are crying out, that more and more of us are crying and yelling about the starvation and the death in Gaza, about the desperate need to bring the remaining hostages home, and about the desperate need to finally end this war that long ago ceased to be a war to protect Israelis and became a war of revenge and of settlement. There are some people who think that you can only cry for Israelis or Palestinians. We've unfortunately seen more and more of that over the last couple of years. There are some people who think that you have to only care about what happened on October 7th, about the atrocities then, or you only have to care about Palestinians. And something that Trua has done, and I know many of our partners on this call have done over the last couple of years, is to model that that is not correct, that actually our hearts are big enough to cry for everybody, that our hearts are big enough to cry for those who are murdered and kidnapped and raped on October 7th, and also to cry for the more than 60,000 Palestinians who have been killed, including more than 18,000 children. The Washington Post, I think just today or yesterday, listed their names and some of their photos, and it's just brutal. And that we can also cry for the nearly 900 soldiers, Israeli soldiers, who have been killed in the war since, and even more if you include those who have died by suicide. And so we're here today to call for the hostages to come home, to end the war, to condemn war crimes on both sides, both by Israel and by Hamas, and to call desperately for humanitarian aid, including a surge of food and of medical support for Gaza and for the rebuilding of Gaza soon, as almost the entire population is displaced and so much of the Gaza Strip has been destroyed. A week or so ago, I wrote an op-ed that I understand has been getting around a lot. And I wrote it, it's in the chat, but I wrote it because I saw that even though most Jews are horrified by the growing starvation in Gaza, many of our legacy organizations had not yet spoken out. And you can read the whole op-ed, but I just want to note that in it, I quoted a very prominent rabbi. I'll mention who he is and the context, but he says that the event again, I'll mention the context, has caused beyond the moral aspects which cry out to the depths of the heavens, a great chilul Hashem, or desecration of God, and Israel and among the nations. And he goes on to accuse the government of Israel of prioritizing the honor of the prime minister over that of God. So the context, this rabbi is Rabbi Yehuda Amital, Zichrono Livracha, who was a prominent rabbi, the rabbi of the Har Etzion Yeshiva in the West Bank. And he was writing this just a few days after the massacres in Sabra and Shatila in 1982, and calling for there to be a commission of inquiry and calling for Israel to really come to account. And as I said in this op-ed, at the same time that he was saying this very prominent Orthodox rabbi, and that some 400,000 Israelis were marching in the street, that what American Jewish organizations were saying were things like, we reject the idea of any participation or involvement by the IDF in this terrible event, or condemning the trigger-quick eagerness of the world to blame, that's the end of the quote, to blame Israel for the incident, which doesn't sound unfamiliar based on some of what we've heard from our communal organizations. And so it's important for American Jews to say that those voices from those organizations, either then, nearly 50 years ago, or now, are not what speaks for American Jews. And in fact, the majority of American Jews, like the majority of Israelis, want this war to end, want the hostages to come home, want the starvation in Gaza to cease, and want to build toward a better future for Israelis and Palestinians. The last thing that I'll say is just on Monday night, perhaps some of you were there, we did a major rally with hundreds of Jewish community members outside of the Israeli consulate, including partnerships with G Street and many of the other organizations that are on this call. And we did this because we knew that American Jews really wanted to show up in this moment. And as part of that, we had a minion of rabbis who were arrested, including me, blocking the street leading to the consulate, putting our bodies on the line to say that we need to make this public statement that rabbis won't stand for what's happening in Gaza, that American Jews won't stand for what's happening in Gaza. So we were really part of a growing movement. There's another rally coming up on Monday in New York, and I know others being planned around the country saying this is not what American Jews want. I want to leave you just with a little bit of hope. This is also from Echa Rabbah, from the book of Midrashim that I started with, that this rabbinic tradition says that every single year while the Israelites were in the wilderness, every single year on Erev Tisha B'Av, they would all dig their own graves. Every single one of the people who had come out of Egypt, they would dig their own graves and they would sleep in that night. And when they would wake up in the morning, they would find out that of the 600,000 people who had originally left for Egypt, that 15,000 had died overnight. That's 1/40th if you don't want to do the math yourself. So every year, 1/40th of the people they found were dead. And on the 40th year, they woke up and they found that nobody was dead. And they said to themselves, we think that we got the night wrong because every single year, 1/40th of us have died this night. And so they went back and they slept in those graves the 10th night, the 11th night, the 12th night, and so on. And finally, in the full moon, which was on the 15th of Av, also known as Tu B'Av, a Jewish love holiday, they said, well, I guess that God has annulled this decree that we're not going to die this year. And they went on to make that a holiday and to say this is when our mourning starts, this is when our mourning ends, mourning with a U. And so as we're going into Tisha B'Av, it's important to remember that this is a day of deep mourning, both for the atrocities that have happened to the Jewish people over the course of our history, and also it is a moment to think about the atrocities that are happening in Gaza or elsewhere in the world in this moment, but that's not the end of the story, that there is another story. There is a moment that we will wake up and find that nobody has died, God willing, that night, a moment that we can move on to build. We know, of course, that the Mashiach is supposed to be born on Tisha B'Av, that redemption ultimately comes from the holiday that commemorates the worst things that have happened to the Jewish people. And so even as we're sitting in this pain and the suffering and calling for it to end, we know that we have, even here on this Zoom, combined with the rest of the American Jewish community and Israelis and Palestinians and everywhere around the world, we have the power to bring forth a better future. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Jacobs, for being for being with us and for being such a voice of conscience for our community. I do want to just note that we are thankful for everyone who's joined us today. We are at over 1,000 attendees right now, which just goes to show how much this is weighing on everyone and how much people feel the need to do something at this moment. I want to turn next to my friend, Rabbi Josh Weinberg, the Vice President of the Union for Reform Judaism for Israel and Reform Zionism, and the Executive Director of ARZA, the Association of Reform Zionists of America. Rabbi Weinberg.
Thank you, Sam, so much, and thanks, Jayshree, for bringing us together. It's truly an honor to be with this esteemed group of colleagues and leaders who came together to express our feelings and our anguish at this moment, and thanks to Rabbi Jacobs for her words as well. As I have been traveling back and forth to Israel several times since October 7th, 2023, one specific marker stands out to me, and that those of you who have, like me and like many of us, arrived at Ben Gurion Airport and walked down the tarmac through the airport, through the terminal on your way to baggage claim and out, into the reception hall, have of course noticed that the walkway is lined with posters of hostages. And each time that I arrive at Ben Gurion Airport, there are fewer and fewer hostage posters lining the walkway there, which is encouraging. It's encouraging because we know that we cannot sleep and we cannot rest until every single one of those hostages has been returned. It's encouraging to think what was the cause of their return, that most of those hostages have come through some diplomatic process, some negotiation, some way of talking and reaching an agreement through which we will bring them out of the hell that they're sitting in. We know that there are 50 still remaining, and we assume and hope that around 20 of them are still alive. What we also know is that the worse the conditions remain and continue to grow worse and more severe in Gaza, will not help bring our hostages out and will not help bring an end to the war. As we recently wrote in our statement, that no one should be unaffected by the pervasive hunger experienced by thousands or hundreds of thousands of Gazans, that no one should spend the bulk of their time arguing over technical definitions between whether it's a famine or starvation or pervasive hunger or how dire the situation is. It is dire and it is deadly, regardless of what news report that you read. We should not also accept that the arguments that because Hamas is the primary reason many Gazans are either starving or on the verge of starving, that we as Jews and the Jewish state is not also responsible. We all know very well who Hamas is and what their motives are, and that they in fact benefit from the worsening of the conditions here. And it should be in the interest of both us as the leaders of many in the Jewish community in North America, and of course the Jewish state, to say the better that we improve those conditions, the worse it will actually be for Hamas. We can't control the actions of others, and we can only control the actions of ourselves. I want to build on what Rabbi Jacobs said in thinking very much about Tisha B'Av, and I want to speak personally for a moment. A couple of weeks ago, I received a letter in the camp mail from my 10th grade daughter, who is spending a summer in a Hebrew immersive program at one of our flagship Reform Movement summer camps. She's spending the summer with 21 and 22-year-old Israeli madrichim, who many of them have served in the reserve units and served in their regular army duty, both in Gaza and the north and around the country, and have lost friends and are deeply affected by the post-October 7th reality. And she asked what seemingly was a simple question, but that pierced much deeper than she had intended. She said to me the following. She said, Abba, I was just wondering, what would we talk about if there was no October 7th? And it led me on a deep journey of introspection and reflection and thinking about this moment in very similar ways to the way that our tradition thinks about the destruction of the temple. That was a point when time changed. That was a point when our reality was disrupted and changed forevermore. And as I thought about it, I thought about what the response of the rabbis was to that destruction. After the two Jerusalem temples were destroyed, they did something radical. They stopped and they reinvented Judaism. We know that sacrifice, of course, gave way to study, and pilgrimage gave way to prayer. A localized God became now omnipresent, dwelling among us in both words and deeds. Their response to destruction was not necessarily despair, but creative resilience and redefinition. And that must come from our brokenness. This moment offers us an opportunity for moral clarity, for solidarity, and of course, for courageous leadership. And when we look at the causes of the destruction of those temples, we often have this Jewish traditional response of looking inwards and saying, what was it about our behavior that led to this calamity, led to this destruction? Was it that we worshiped false gods and were guilty of idol worship, or was it the ever well-known notion of sinat chinam, of wanton hatred of one another? And of course, as a student of Jewish history, you have to look at the sectarian Judaism of that time and look at those who exhibited extreme, if not zealous, behavior. It was those who were calling and burning food stocks in order to prevent Jews from leaving Jerusalem to flee the siege on the city. It was those who saw one singular vision as the only possible outcome, which we know was so dangerous and which we know led to disaster for our people. Sadly, we see this zealous and extremist ideology coming from none other than the halls of the Knesset and the seats of the government sitting around that cabinet table today. Calls to level Gaza, to destroy everything in our midst, and calls, in fact, to now resettle Gaza and annex parts of those territories for the benefit of Israel. Let this moment on Tisha B'Av be a reminder, be a clarion call that we must reject and we must stand up strongly in opposition to those ministers of the governor who call for continued violence, who call for continued mass killing, and for those who make Palestinian lives seem less than Jewish lives. That is a critically important moment. You see, before October 7th, we talked about justice, freedom, peace, and tikva, and hope. We talked about democracy and the importance of its preservation. Those are the things that we must talk about again. We must talk about them now more than ever, because while we are a people who remember the ruins in our history, we are also a people who rebuild from them. I ask all of us to join together now to reject that extremism, that messianism, and call to rebuild back on the values of the foundation of the state of Israel, and exactly that justice, freedom, and peace that we read in our Declaration of Independence, and that we come together with a clear moral voice for this moment. Toda rabba.
Thank you, Rabbi Weinberg, for being with us today and for what you and the URJ do every day. I'd now like to turn it over to Rabbi Deborah Waxman, President and CEO of Reconstructing Judaism.
Thanks so much to you, Sam, and everyone at J Street for organizing this. And I apologize for the not so great connection. I'm on vacation with my family, and this is the only place I could be at this moment. And this is the best I could do. We live in a time of contested authority. What it means to be Jewish and what Judaism stands for on its own right and in relationship to Israel is one of the most urgent conversations of our day. This is a time for those of us who believe that it is possible to be fiercely Jewish and care about Israel and Israelis, and also care about the well-being and aspiration of Palestinians. It's a time for us to raise our voices. It's a time for those of us who interpret Jewish teachings to mandate the recognition that every individual is created in the image of God, and that we are commanded to provide for those who are the most vulnerable among us. It's a time for us to assert that as an authoritative vision. Modernity, hundreds of years ago, gave the Jewish people so many gifts, and it also came with many costs. And this includes contested authority, the loss of Jewish communal cohesion, and the separation of the religion of Judaism from the experience of Jewishness. The Jewish people responded to the uncertainties introduced by modernity by proposing comprehensive answers through ideological movements. All the modern religious movements, including the Reform movement, including Reconstructionism, emerged in the 19th and the 20th centuries as ways to demonstrate that it is possible to be religious and rational, to be citizens and Jews. And Zionism was another proposed solution, this one drawing from the 19th century predominant strategy of nationalism. But even Zionism immediately became contested. Was it then, is it now, as Ahad Ha'am theorized, a cultural movement that could completely replace religious Judaism? Is it, as David Ben-Gurion insisted, a political movement that is exclusively oriented toward building up the state of Israel? Did that political movement achieve its goal in 1948, as some commentators have suggested? Is Zionism the marriage of religious messianism, ethnic supremacism, and state power, as the current governing coalition in Israel enacts on a daily basis? Is it, as Mordecai Kaplan, the founding thinker of Reconstructionism, asserted, an Israel-centered movement that fosters worldwide Jewish peoplehood and ethical nationhood? In the Reconstructionist movement, there's broad diversity of opinion, but overwhelmingly, we believe in the deep bond of Jewish peoplehood, a global sense of connection, care, and responsibility that links all Jews to one another. And we also believe that Judaism commands us to pursue justice and to uphold the dignity of all people. We struggle to create space that can hold both our love for the Jewish people and our moral stance against oppression. We affirm our ties to Israel and to Jewish peoplehood, and at the same time lift our voices in solidarity with others working for human rights, freedom, and dignity for Palestinians and Israelis alike. This orientation calls us to demand, once again, with most of the other speakers on this call, an end to this war, the release of hostages, a surge in humanitarian aid to Gaza, and plans for regional rebuilding based on equity and sustainability. In the midst of contested authority, this is the time to claim our own authority and to assert our vision of Judaism and Jewish values. It's a time to stand together with the Jewish people in Israel and around the world, to decry the atrocities of October 7th and to demand that we see and respect the humanity of Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza. It's a time to embrace Judaism and Jewishness without giving up on universal values. It's a time to rejoice in Jewish peoplehood without descending into tribalism. And we bring this to life by staying connected to each other across our differences and committing to wrestling with complexity l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. We are on the eve, first Shabbat, and then descending into the morning of around Tisha B'Av, this commemoration of external destruction and internal discord. May we enter it, may we rise out of it with the commitment to enact both our fight against oppression and our love for Israel and the Jewish people.
Thank you, Rabbi Waxman. We are, as always, grateful for your partnership every day. UnXeptable has been such an important voice these days and has been doing important work even before October 7th. And so we are honored to have its co-founder, Offir Gutelzon, with us today. Offir.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, everyone. So thank you, J Street, for organizing this rally, and thank you, every organization and leader who is here. My name is Offir Gutelzon, co-founder of UnXeptable, and we are here because silence is not neutral. Silence is the face of what's happening now. It's a choice, one we refuse to make. Israel's just war in Gaza has become a Kahanist war, a war of domination, not security, for land, not life. In Israel, many of us call the people driving this agenda Death Eaters. Listen to the words of the people in power in Israel. Heritage Minister Amichai Eliyahu just said yesterday, Gaza must be Jewish, and then it will be better for Arabs too. We must define the hostages as prisoners of war. You only deal with POWs after the victory. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich on recognizing a Palestinian state. We need to just make sure there will be nothing left to recognize. These are not slips of tongue. They are a program. The overt plan involved in permanent control over Gaza and the dispossession of Gaza and the abandonment of our hostages. That is moral bankruptcy. It is anti-Jewish to subordinate pikuach nefesh, the saving of life, to a messianic ideology. And it is anti-democratic to deny millions their rights while pretending it is for security. Let's be clear. The vast majority of Israelis do not want this. The families of the hostages, bereaved families, reservists, and veterans, and civic leaders across the spectrum are begging for the end of the war and a deal to bring everyone home. Our movement, an Israeli American together with Jewish American, exists to give that majority a louder voice. So tonight, we end the silence and issue 3 clear calls. To the Trump administration, use every tool of American leverage now to secure a single comprehensive deal that brings all hostages home and ends this war. That means real pressure for immediate ceasefire, for hostages deal, and a surge of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Food, medicine, water, and shelter at scale. No more after the victory fantasies. Lives are the victory. Ending the war must come with a credible plan to dismantle Hamas military capacity and remove it from governing Gaza, so that neither Israelis nor Palestinians are condemned to another cycle of terror and reprisal. To Congress and to the American Jewish leadership, draw a bright red line. Stop laundering Kahanism as pro-Israel. Condition support on democratic norms and stopping annexation by stealth and settler violence, and no concrete steps that protect civilians. Release hostages and restore the rule of law. If ministers preaching ethnic cleansing, they must not be welcome in your halls or on your stages. And to our community, organize, donate, and show up. Call your representatives, support the hostages' families, Israeli pro-democracy groups, humanitarian relief for Gaza, and every effort that puts life first. Push your synagogue, federation, and campuses to speak with moral clarity. We stand for Jewish and democratic Israel, not for messianic theocracy. Some will say security first. We agree. But real security comes from ending the war that is producing more enemies than it eliminates, from returning our people alive, from stopping settlers' rampage that ignite the West Bank, from ensuring that two people can live with dignity instead of permanent humiliation. At this moment, as we speak, IDF and security chiefs from generations past gathers in Tel Aviv to make exactly the same demand. They are not left, they are not right, they are just straight. They said to IDF Chief Zamir, where there are no people, strive to be a person. Our Judaism commands us to choose life. Our democracy commands us to choose equality. And our movement commands us to act. Let us build a political path forward in which life is upheld and our humanity does not end at the border, in which Hamas is disarmed and removed from power, and Israelis and Palestinians can live with dignity and safety. And to everyone here on this call, thank you for not refusing silence. Thank you for choosing courage over comfort. Together as Israeli American and Jewish Americans, we are building the coalition that can help turn the page. Maybe we worthy of the charge of our tradition gives us Uvacharta b'chaim, and you choose life for hostages, for Israelis and Palestinians, and for future where Israel is proudly Jewish and democratic again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Offir, and to you and to everyone at UnXeptable for what you do every day for Israeli democracy. Turning it over now to Rabbi Justus Baird, Senior Vice President at the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America. Rabbi Baird.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you to our J Street organizers. My name is Justus Baird. I work at the Shalom Hartman Institute. I direct the Research Center in North America and also oversee our interfaith and intergroup work. At Hartman, we're deeply committed to really developing liberal Zionist thinking that can address the ongoing crisis. And one of the most accessible places we do that is through one of our podcasts, For Heaven's Sake. So for those of you who are podcast people, you may want to check out this week's episode between Daniel Hartman and Yossi Klein Halevi about the famine issue in Gaza. I want to focus my brief words to those. I want to speak to those who may be hesitant to raise their voice right now, who might feel some element of a sense that speaking out is in some small way an act of betrayal. We all know there are plenty of enemy voices that are critiquing Israel. And I think what Israel needs right now is more friendly voices critiquing Israel. The model that helps me think about that comes from political philosopher Michael Walzer. Walzer spent a few decades of his career developing an idea that he called the connected critic. And connected critics, Walzer wrote, measure their distance from the society that they are critiquing in inches. So yesterday I went back to some of the original essays where he was developing these ideas, and he wrote that the connected critic earns his or her authority or fails to earn it by arguing with his or her fellows who angrily and insistently, Walzer wrote, sometimes at considerable personal risk, object, protest, and remonstrate. The critic is one of us, Walzer said. Social criticism, he argued, is an internal argument. Walzer saw the Hebrew prophets as an excellent example of a connected critic. And the prophets spent the bulk of their energy critiquing their own society, not other nations. Prophetic teaching, Walzer said, was characterized by a principle of solidarity. In our day, and perhaps it's always been like this, most critics of Israel are quickly accused of betraying the state or betraying the people in some way. But Walzer's notion of a connected critic really reminds us that the most effective critics are those who are on the inside, who are the most deeply connected to the society that they are critiquing. And this idea has really helped me think about when to use my voice, how to find other voices who are most likely to be heard by those who are currently in power. So thanks to all of you for joining this call and for raising your voice in the way that you are able to do.
Thank you, Rabbi Baird, for being with us. Now I can turn it over to Hadar Susskind, the president and CEO of New Jewish Narrative. Hadar.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you to everybody at J Street for bringing us all together here today. And thank you, Rabbi Baird, for quoting from NJN board member Michael Walzer. We've talked a lot, rightly and understandably, about October 7th. I want to raise another date, actually, and that's January 2nd, 2023. January 2nd, 2023 was the first day in office of the Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, and Friends government. And on that day, we gathered a group, it was maybe 60 people or so, outside of the Embassy of Israel in Washington, D.C., and stood up and spoke out and said, this is not a legitimate government. And this is a government, we used a phrase at the time that admittedly was, going for the cute alliteration of it being fascists and felons and fundamentalists. And unfortunately, in the time since then, we've seen the impacts of all three of those elements over and over and over again. And so many of my colleagues have talked rightly about the Israel that we believe in and the Israel that we strive to see. And I think that that's really important. And that is, for me, as somebody who, many years ago at this point decided to go to Israel, to join the IDF, to be a combat soldier, all of those things were done out of a sense of that aspiration of supporting and defending the state that we believe in. But I want to talk about something that's, well, for me at least, more difficult, which is the state that we have. And I think that while it is important for all of us, wherever we come from to this discussion, to talk about, as Justice Baird just did so well, the need to speak up and the importance of raising your voices and doing so in our, this is a large internal conversation. There are 1,000 of us, but it's mostly still an internal conversation. I think what we really need to be doing today, as very difficult as it is talking about the uncomfortable things and talking about the ways, not only what we want to see and the fact that we need to speak up. And Offir talked about using every tool of American leverage. So I want to say what some of those tools are, because I think often we call for using every tool or doing everything we can, but what does that mean? And one of the things it means for me and for us at New Jewish Narrative, and I understand this is not for everyone, is, yesterday there were votes on 2 bills by Senator Sanders to halt the sale of 2 specific sets of weapons to Israel. We supported those. It's conditioning aid. It's a thing we support. It's honestly, for me, as someone, one of these bills was to halt the sale of rifles to Israel. As somebody who once carried one of those rifles with an Israeli uniform on, that is painful and that is difficult. But when we say every available tool of leverage, that's the actual tool of leverage. So when we start to talk about these things, I think we need to get into the specifics and what they are. And we need to look, yes, at the country and that we want to see, but we also need to look at the reality that we have and how do we get from one spot to the other. Actually, going back 4 years ago, we put out a position again in support of conditioning aid. It was a very difficult process. It was a very difficult decision. We did it, and I think the link's going to be shared to this article in the chat, but we did it as a clear statement that says we support aid to Israel, and we believe that if we want aid to continue, it's going to need to be aligned with our values and aligned with our laws. And otherwise, we're going to end up in a situation where aid is completely cut. Unfortunately, for very terrible reasons, we are seeing those efforts to cut aid. We are seeing over and over again voices saying, why should we support Israel at all? Why should we support even Iron Dome and David's Sling and defensive tools, which we think are absolutely necessary? Looking at that, looking at the votes on those JRDs, and looking at how do we move ourselves as Jewish community voices and leaders and our elected officials, because frankly, I don't believe our elected officials are going to move without our voices urging them to do so. We need to be willing to talk about the difficult things. We need to be willing to say the difficult things. Once upon a time in quainter days, right, there were those who didn't want to say occupation. Then we had arguments about apartheid. Is it apartheid here? Is it apartheid there? Can we say that? Then, we've talked about, and people said we shouldn't be, I think it was Rabbi Weinberg thing, we shouldn't be arguing about the details. Is it hunger? Is it famine? Is it this? Is that? Which I wholeheartedly agree. But we do need to be able to say the words. And we all know the big argument that's happening right now all around us is about the use of the word genocide, right? I'm not here to say whether it is or is not. I'm fully unqualified to do so. But I think as leaders and as a community, we have to be able to engage with what is actually the debate happening right now. Because if we just fall back on what so many others are doing and just say, no, that's, you can't talk about that. That's just anti-Semitism. It's this. We're not helping. We're not helping Israelis. We're certainly not helping Palestinians. And we need to be able to, in good faith, bring our views to this and talk about what is happening. And again, many people have talked about, the blame that is to go all around. There's more than enough blame. Personally, I'm not interested in sitting here saying who's to blame. I want to know, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to make it better? Is it hunger? Is it famine? I don't care. Let's make it better. Is it genocide? The word is not the part that's important. What's important is the unspeakable tragedy that is happening right now and what we as community leaders can do to push through that. And I think that requires all of us stepping out of the comfort zone. We're all past our comfort zones, I know that, but it requires all of us taking it even more and saying to people, yes, this is what's happening. We love Israel. We believe deeply and care deeply about the state of Israel and the people of Israel. And what the government is doing is wrong, period. And we need to say it, and we need to do what we can as organizations, and we need to encourage our government and our elected officials to do what they can, to use all the tools of American leverage. And there are a lot of tools, right? I talked about, and we often talk about aid because it's the contentious one, but there are many, and we should be using them all. And unfortunately, certainly I don't look to this American administration for any significant leadership. We just saw a heinous murder by a settler of a Palestinian peace activist, a settler who had been sanctioned by the Biden administration, and the current administration removed those sanctions. But even in a moment where the US government is not doing what I would like to see them doing, where our Congress is not, and where certainly the Israeli government is not, it's all the more essential for us to raise our voices as leaders, as American Jews, as Israeli Americans, whatever category you fit in, to raise our voices and say, this must stop. We must do everything we can. We can't sit back and look at this and say, this is the end goal we'd like to achieve someday, but we're unwilling to acknowledge or do or say any of the things we need to do to get there. And it's hard and it's painful. And I wish we had easier steps to it, but I think we have to come together, and I'm glad we're all here today to prioritize the reality that we're in, not just the hopes that we wish for. So again, thank you, Sam, J Street, and everyone who's here today.
And thank you, Hadar, for raising those tough issues and those tough questions for all of us to wrestle with. I'd like to turn it over now to Rabbi Margo Hughes-Robinson, the Executive Director of Partners for Progressive Israel. Rabbi.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for everyone joining this urgent call, and especially to Sam and to J Street for convening us all today and hosting this very painful but very necessary conversation. I'm Rabbi Margo Hughes-Robinson. I'm the executive director of PPI, Partners for Progressive Israel. And for over 3 decades, Partners has really been dedicated to connecting American progressives in the Jewish community and beyond with progressive movements and leaders in Israel and in Palestine, from grassroots organizations to elected leaders who are working for these values we've reiterated over and over on this call of peace and justice and human rights for everyone in the land. I want to share a few words with you. The roofs were filled with women and small children expiring from hunger, and the corpses of old men were piled in the streets. Youth swollen with hunger wandered like shadows in the marketplace until they collapsed. No one mourned the dead because hunger had deadened all feeling. These lines are not from a journalist writing today. They're from Flavius Josephus, writing about the siege of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple in 70 CE, a horror we'll mourn for this weekend on Tisha B'Av. Our Jewish history and our tradition tells us of the impact of famine and war, the way that this kind of devastation can fundamentally shift the identity and the communal story of a people. It reverberates for generations. And let me be clear, what we are witnessing right now is an emergency. The IPC, the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification Organization that provides intergovernmental collaboration, analysis of food security, nutrition analysis all over the world, declared earlier this week that Gaza is experiencing, and I quote, a worst-case scenario of famine. Doctors on the ground are reporting that children in Gaza currently experiencing malnutrition cannot be expected to recover. If aid surged into the Gaza Strip today, and it must surge, only children who are not experiencing malnutrition can be expected to survive. And my heart is especially heavy knowing that 50 Israeli hostages kidnapped on October 7th, 2023, are still held by Hamas and experiencing those same conditions alongside Gazan civilians, in addition to the reports of extreme violence and potential torture that they are facing. And in the West Bank, we are seeing lethal settler violence inflame the already precarious conditions for so many Palestinian villages and communities, some of whom have been completely forced out of their homes by illegal settler land expropriation and violent intimidation. Many in our PPI community in the US and in the land especially are particularly mourning the murder of peace activist and educator Alda Hathalin earlier this week. As of right now, the government is actually still refusing to release his body to his family in Al-Khir, and the military forcibly evacuated and disrupted the Hathalin family's mourning tent this week. And our partners in Israel, including many of the hostage families who we are deeply honored to be in relationship with, have faced abject failure from the Netanyahu administration and even police brutality inside of Israel, as they've continued to advocate to bring their family members home in a full hostage exchange deal, and they have called over and over again for an end to this terrible war. The current government is seeking to destroy their access to funding, to criminalize their protests, and any attempt to speak out for human rights and for peace, both for Jewish and non-Jewish citizens of Israel alike. Palestinian citizens of Israel who speak out against the war in particular have been facing 2 years of a great deal of police intimidation and arbitrary arrests within a climate where the Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, has over and over again very publicly remarked that he does not intend to police for community safety within Palestinian citizens of Israel's communities, abandoning whole neighborhoods and towns for the protection afforded to them as citizens. So those of us who care deeply for Israelis and for Palestinians must speak up. Taking a brave stand against this government and its military and political decisions may feel really different or even at odds with the kind of Israel advocacy that many of us are used to. But it is the most loving thing that you can do for Israeli and Palestinian people right now. A vast majority of Israelis are calling for a permanent end to the war and a full hostage deal now. Palestinian people are crying out for the world to recognize their rights to safety and to freedom. At Partners, we feel that it's past time to recognize a Palestinian state alongside Israel. And if we feel connection and relationship and pain and love for this place and for the peoples who live there, It's that connection and that relationship and that care that obligates us to raise our voices and to speak out and to say with one voice, enough is enough.
Thank you, Rabbi. Very much appreciate those words. Turn it over now to Elisheva Goldberg, Senior Director of Media and Policy at the New Israel Fund.
Hi, everyone. And thank you, everyone, for being here. And thank you, J Street, again, for convening us. Just to reiterate, I'm Elisheva Goldberg. I'm the Director of Media and Policy for the New Israel Fund. And I want to talk really honestly and directly about what we're seeing on the ground and what the New Israel Fund is doing in response. But before I do, some of you know that I myself have been an activist for a long time. And most of that was direct activism in the South Hebron Hills in villages like Omacher, Susia, and Tuane. And the murder of Auda Hathalin this week, some of our speakers have already mentioned, Margo just did, was a very, very dear friend of mine. I could speak about him for my entire time here, but he was a nonviolent activist who was killed by a settler who walked into his village with a loaded gun. This man, as Hadar also mentioned, Yinon Levy had been sanctioned by the U.S. administration and others until he was unsanctioned by Trump. Auda was just trying to protect his village, and his death really speaks directly to the cost of the violence that has been ongoing in the West Bank for so many years. So may Auda rest in peace. Let me talk just a little bit more about the West Bank also. We're really seeing, as Margo also mentioned, a campaign of expulsion for Palestinians in Area C like we've never seen before. Violent settlers are emboldened and far too often supported by the state, by the current Israeli government, and they're entering villages with loaded weapons, walking onto or into people's homes like they own them. And of course, at NIF, we are all about action. So we're not just bearing witness and telling you about it. We are doing what we call building and blocking. We're supporting protective presence teams that live alongside these communities, doing everything we can to slow down the demolitions and settler attacks by making sure that people are there and that the world sees what's happening. I myself have been a part of those activist communities, and I know that they really work. And of course, in addition to blocking this, we are also investing in what comes next and building infrastructure, programs, women-led organizing, and the building blocks for a more democratic and equal future. Because we know, as so many, again, have already said before me, that the occupation and what's going on in Gaza are not just a moral failure, they're also a political dead end. We're not giving up on the alternative, and we know that the future must be rooted in justice, in dignity, and equality for everybody who lives between the river and the sea. And so that brings me to Gaza. Obviously, what's happening there is catastrophic. So much already on this call has been said, and comparing it to the moments in the liturgy and in our traditions from Tisha B'Av, but it is so profoundly catastrophic. The mass displacement, the starvation, the disease, the complete destruction of hospitals, universities, and neighborhoods. As people who believe in human rights, it is really difficult to know what to do and how to help. And that is why at the New Israel Fund, we launched a Gaza emergency response campaign. We actually launched this back in Passover of 2024, but it's been growing and growing. And we're directing funding towards humanitarian organizations that are actually getting aid to people who are in desperate need. They're not abstract lives. They're families, kids, parents, and students, people who have dreams and who should have rights. And even when our hands feel tied by politics, our values remain clear. We are always going to insist on life. We are always going to insist on hope. And we are always going to insist on human rights. And the money that we're raising is going to World Central Kitchen and Clean Shelter. And we've raised close to $3 million so far. And this week, even just this week, we're seeing a major influx of resources because World Central Kitchen has said again in an op-ed in the New York Times and on their Instagram page that they're back to serving hot meals, and they're really trying to scale up. And in addition to serving starving people, they're also helping people get protected from the increasingly brutal and violent experience of going to try and get food from either the airdrops or the relief centers that have turned into death traps. So that is where we are in Gaza. And I will just say that at the same time, so this is like, simultaneous crisis upon crisis, we are continuing to fight for the things that NIF, the New Israel Fund, was built for. We are fighting for a robust civil society that protects everybody's rights to free speech, to protest, to live without fear, Civil society is right now arguably the strongest pillar of Israel's democracy at a time when so many other pillars, the courts, the standing of the attorney general, even the police force, are being undermined by the government and their independence pulled out from under them. So some of you may have heard of the Civil Society Protection Hub, which is an NIF initiative that's become more essential every day. As the government cracks down on dissent in Israel, it smears human rights organizations, clashes outright with the judiciary. We are making sure that our grantees have legal defense, rapid response strategies, and international solidarity from the get-go. And it's not theoretical, because threats to civil society, which is an independent power center standing up to the government, are very, very real. But our people, just like everybody on this call, we keep working. Our people are protesting on the ground in growing numbers to end the war, to stop the starvation in Gaza, and to free every single one of the hostages. And they're insisting that the future can be better than the past and certainly can be better than the present. And they're saying loudly and clearly that the way forward will not be around, but through our differences as Jews and Palestinians working together. Israeli civil society doesn't have the option of walking away from the fights that they have ahead, and we will not let them stand alone. We know that this is hard work. It doesn't lend itself to easy headlines or instant victories, but this is what it means to be working for a better future in Israel today, to protect life in Gaza, to defend civil society in Israel, and resist the machinery of annexation in the West Bank. NIF has never looked away, and with so many of you at J Street as our trusted partner and our supporters, we never, ever will. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisheva. It's NIF is doing such important work, and we are so proud to be a partner with you. Finally, happy to turn it over to Shanie Reichman, Director of Strategic Initiatives and IPF Atid at Israel Policy Forum. Shanie.
Thanks, Sam, and thank you to J Street for convening this call. And it's great to see so many allies and partners on here. I've been inspired by the work of all of you and by the words of so many rabbis. I'm not often on panels with so many rabbis, and it's been really special to hear all of your insights ahead of Tisha B'Av. There's a link in the chat where you can see our website, which includes a recent webinar we had on the humanitarian disaster in Gaza with our Director of Policy Research and Senior Official from COGAT. So I'm the director of our Young Professionals Program, IPF Atid, which means the core of my work is to build communities of young American Jews who are deeply committed to a secure Jewish democratic Israel and know that the only path to maintaining such a state is through reconciliation with the Palestinians. In the wake of the atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th, this has only become more challenging and more urgent and critical. We know from the data that the vast majority of young American Jews care about Israel, feel connected to Israel, believe in it as the homeland of the Jewish people, and also feel deeply conflicted and even distraught by the actions of a government that conflicts and contradicts their Jewish values, moral values, and political values. They want to be connected to Israelis and Palestinians who share their own vision and values. However, the discourse about Israel is dominated by those who despise Israel on one side and those who are completely blind to its flaws on the other. And so many of the thousands of people who find us feel completely isolated and alone in their complex relationship with Israel, despite actually being the majority. And that makes it even more urgent to me to be clear and loud and bold, which is why I'm so glad to join this webinar that makes it so clear how many of us are really aligned here. Because many of us are connected and committed to Israel and also troubled and horrified by what's happening. And it's important to not feel and be alone in this. In light of that, we bring together a really broad spectrum of Jews across political and religious divides, working in partnership with an array of diverse Jewish communities and organizations across North America to engage them in a pragmatic, policy-oriented discourse centered not around relitigating the past, but about focusing on a horizon for Israelis and Palestinians with both peace and security, which we know are linked and go side by side. You can read our statement on our website, but last week Israel Policy Forum affirmed that Israel has every right and indeed an imperative to hold Hamas to account. But after more than 660 days of war, the only way to defeat Hamas is to engage in a political strategy, not a military one. The U.S. is critical to what happens next. President Trump's call for the United States to own Gaza earlier this year gave life to the fantasies and also plans of the Israeli extreme right and provided an unrealistic endgame for Prime Minister Netanyahu's pursuit of total victory. And the U.S. must lead on a course correction, which is all to say that this war was once just, but has been prolonged for too many months at the expense of the hostages, of Gazan civilians, and of all Israelis. We need to provide a vision for a better future that includes substantive policy paths to get there. So let's envision a future where Israel's security is strengthened through steps to resolve the conflict with the Palestinians, a future where a reformed Palestinian Authority provides real governance, rejects extremism, and becomes a legitimate voice of Palestinian aspirations, a future where Israel becomes fully integrated into the region, leading to greater prosperity and stability in the Middle East. We know that the majority of American Jews support this, and there's enough data to indicate that Israelis can get behind many variations of this as well. And you can find on our website all of the reports that deal with a variety of those issues. This will be a future where Israel's strategic direction reflects the ideals upon which it was founded, a future where the US-Israel relationship is strong and enduring, rooted in our shared interests and democratic values. And for any of that to happen, for all of that to happen, this war, the plight of the hostages, the humanitarian disaster in Gaza, and Hamas's reign of terror all must end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shanie, for the work you and IPF are doing. I want to thank all of our speakers for taking the time today and for this demonstrating such strong leadership within the American Jewish community. And thank all of you for taking the time today. But that does not stop here. This is just the first step. There is still plenty to do. And you'll see in the chat to some links that other things you can take as next steps. First is we're going to ask for you to sign our petition if you haven't already. This is not an empty petition. We are going to use this and point to this to encourage other organizations, other institutions in our community to speak up. You can download and print our poster and our yard sign. Call your members of Congress, tell them to do everything they can to end this war, to bring the hostages home, to surge aid into Gaza. Whether it's leaders on this call or others, thank the clergy and institutions that are speaking up and push those who haven't to do so. Who is not on this call that you want to be? Who has not put out a statement? Who has not taken action that should? Now's the time to ask them to do those things. So thank you all for showing up and speaking out, and we will be in touch. Thanks, everybody.